Well, hello, everybody. I just wanted to welcome you again to one of our Zoom classes. And I am Jeannie Krause, and along with my brother-in-law, Dave Grenby, and his wife, my sister, Terry Grenby. And tonight we're going to be talking about health conditions associated with seasonal changes, primarily winter, for your alpaca. So Dave is really good at researching a lot of different things about the animals, and so he's going to be speaking tonight about that. And so, Dave, you're ready to give us some good news?
I am.
Awesome. Go for it.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jeannie. Okay. It's been getting really cold here in Virginia where we live, so it's got me thinking about winter and some of the issues that we might be facing as alpaca farmers. And I like to, with these topics, try to be a little proactive. I know it's probably a couple more months, before we actually have winter, but things that you need to be thinking about, and especially if we're going to be using protocols, our protocols as treatments, we want to start early. So, and not wait till we're in the middle of a crisis period. So anyway, the kind of my talk, I'm going to start off talking about some common communicable conditions. They're not always diseases, and we'll talk about that for a couple of minutes, and then I'll actually get into some maybe more specific issues or concerns and conditions with winter and the type of environment that we see during that time of year. So, common communicable diseases, a lot of, are things like coccidias, lice, mange, ringworms, other types of worms. Mites, and then there's also the bacterial and the viral conditions. And, you'll see this more with like runny noses that you see with your alpacas, a lot of airborne pathogens that you might see this time of year in wintertime, and, some skin infections as well. It might be brought on by the mites. Mange is brought on by sarcoptic mites. Some of these things could be other skin type of conditions, but more likely at this time of year it would be mites versus mange, which is more picked up in the pasture during wet, more moist kind of and warmer kind of conditions. Now, some of the sources of the contamination that would cause these communicable diseases or communicable conditions, I don't want to call them all diseases. The bedding, in the wintertime, your animals are more huddled together in the barn. So like bedding, the fecal material, water could be a source of a contamination. Rodents, rodents start to come into the barn during the colder season. Probably not as much insects. A lot of the insects are dying off this time of year. Usually birds, unless you live in the south. If you live in the south, maybe birds could be an issue. A lot of the birds head south, during the winter, so it's not as much, but they can really be a source of contamination as well. If you have new additions to your herd, if you've purchased some animals, and you might have males and females coming in and out of your farm because they're gone off for breeding or whatever, and then coming back, this is a good time for that. And then animals, this is a good time for shows as well. So animals are going to be leaving the barn, going to shows, and then coming back. And then when they come back, they're bringing things with them, contaminants with them from other animals they've been exposed to. And this contamination is spread by a lot of different ways. In your water buckets, your feeders, people that are handling your animals, which could include your veterinarian, people who are shearing your animals, being in trailers and transported with other animals. Sometimes when you go to a show, you put your animal in a stall with animals that are not from your farm, and they could be picking up different types of conditions. Animals spit on each other, and especially if one is infected and they spit on the others, then there's a good chance with the airborne pathogens that they're going to be at high risk. And animals that are exposed to other animals that are not from your farm at shows are certainly at higher risk. And sometimes water systems that haven't been flushed or cleaned, like it shows again, or other farms. They're more common in the winter, some of these conditions, because more time is spent in the barn versus in the pasture, especially if you're in an area, part of the country where there's more snow or inclement weather. The animals are going to be huddled together. They're going to have closer contact with one another. So, and when they're all together, then you also have an increased incidence of like a wet or soiled bedding, which could be a primary breeding ground for some of these conditions. So these animals are commingling in the barn much more so this time of the year, the wintertime, than they were in the summer when they're out breathing fresh air, they're out in the pasture, they're moving around more. They're more likely to have nose-to-nose contact with each other. So again, these communicable conditions, highly prevalent when animals are commingling and they have more nose-to-nose time with each other. And the conditions that are brought on, like I said earlier, with the bedding that might be wet, if it's snowing or raining, ice or whatever, melting ice, and these animals are bringing that into the barn, and they're soaking wet, and they're getting that into their bedding. Again, it's just an excellent source of contamination, and something that we need to be thinking about as we're thinking about healthy animals. So some of the treatments for these types of communicable diseases, some basic things, like I would say, first of all, everybody should know their animals, and you observe your animals. You know what's normal and what's abnormal behavior for them, for each individual animal. So if you see one of your animals that's doing something that doesn't look quite normal, that should be a red flag that there's something going on. Some people quarantine if they have these issues, any types of issues, especially communicable. They'll quarantine their animals until they get like 2 negative fecal counts, and usually they're 2 weeks apart, checking for parasites that might be brought in, again, if you're at a show or someplace off the farm with your animal. If it's a EMAC, coccidia, the recommendation is to, because the EMACs have an incubation period of a little bit longer than some of these other parasites. It's usually about 40 to 45 days. So you would consider doing fecals a little more frequently than every 2 weeks, maybe every 10 days. And you might have that animal quarantined for up to 6 weeks or longer until you start seeing negative fecal exams. So some people would consider quarantines, okay, in addition to knowing your animals. A big thing that we could do as essential oil advocates is to make sure our cleaning and disinfecting protocols are used more frequently, because of the conditions that I mentioned earlier and how these things are transmitted. So the food and the water buckets, the poop piles, the walls, anything that you can clean with our cleaning and disinfecting protocol, it's very powerful. These essential oils are very powerful. And I think in the winter, when more animals are confined, and I think you're going to be at a higher risk, use those cleaning protocols with our essential oils much more frequently than you would other times of the year. Skin conditions, it could be like mites, mange, lice, ringworm, those types of things, again, might be more prevalent in the wintertime because of some of the conditions that I mentioned earlier. One of the advantages that essential oils has over some of the other ectoparasite treatments is that essential oils are highly effective in being ovicidal, which means they kill parasite eggs. And you don't see that in some of the chemical and synthetic treatments that kill the actual bug, but they don't actually kill the larvae and the eggs of these parasites. We know from our research that essential oils do kill the eggs. So for these skin conditions, that's use our skin condition protocol. We have both the 2 different kinds of protocols there. One's a spray on, one's an ointment that's rubbed on. They've got some excellent oils that address these conditions. We've talked about tea tree and some of the other things, lavender, and some of the other oils that we put into this the protocol, the formula. And again, using the spray if it's placed on the animals like their legs versus an ointment that you could easily rub on maybe their nose or their chin or something like that. And I think lastly, and maybe more importantly than a treatment other than the other 4 that I just mentioned, is the immune system enhancement. This is good for your entire herd, during the winter, because this is a time when they're at increased risk for all these conditions that I've mentioned. Now, especially important if you have juvenile alpacas that are like less than 9 years old, because their mature systems really haven't, or immune systems really haven't matured until they're about maybe 14, 15 months of age. So, and people that have alpacas know if they're showing, an alpaca you can take your alpaca to a show as soon as it's 6 months old. And a lot of people taking their 6 months olds, they want to get them on the show circuit as soon as possible. So between 6 months and 15 months, these alpacas' immune system have not been fully developed. So your crias, or your juveniles, are at much higher risk and of picking up all kinds of outside pathogens when you're taking them to shows or whatever. Nutrition really helps, strong nutrition and making sure you're doing the right type of nutritional feed for your animals. But our immune system enhancement is really probably critical, and especially for the younger ones, as I mentioned. And our immune system protocol, we have in the protocol, I think, every twice a week. During the winter months, when your animals are huddled up in the barn and they're close proximity to each other, I would recommend at least 3 times a week, maybe even 4 times a week, just to make sure that you're not going to overdose with these things, with our protocol. And since they're at much higher risk this time of year, I would highly recommend that. Okay, those are some general conditions. Now some more specific ones. Stress. This is caused by a couple of different things or multiple different things. Things I thought about this time of year is when your animal's moving off of the pasture and they're starting to move into hay, eating more hay and getting more nutrition from hay than they are out in the pasture, those dietary changes can cause huge amounts of stress in alpacas. So, we often don't think about that, but your pasture, you might have a blend of different types of grasses or whatever, but your hay probably is a strict orchard grass or something like that. That's a huge change for the gut of these animals and their stomach microbiome. So that could cause increased stress. Other causes, your animals are going to more shows, probably. They're exposed to unfamiliar conditions at some of these shows, different people, different environmental settings. They're being transported in trailers to different places. When animals come in the wintertime, I didn't realize this till I started doing a little bit of research. The social hierarchy changes when they're moved to confined areas. When they're out in the pasture, you might see one social hierarchy where there's 1 or 2 animals that are really dominant. When you get them confined areas, that hierarchy could change, and that creates tremendous stress for everybody in the pecking order. So those are some of the things. Allergies, there might be some animals that have more seasonal allergies than others. So those are some of the things that would cause stress during this time of year. And again, the treatment is, obviously our stress protocol. And whether you're diffusing it in your barn to try to really get that out to all your animals, or whether you're having them ingest, the protocol oils that we have in our booklet, or whether it's topical, any way you can get the stress protocol to these animals, I would highly recommend, and maybe even increasing your frequency on that as well, especially if they're confined. If you have like a long couple of weeks where maybe they're in there because you have excessive amounts of snow, they're starting to get cabin fever, they're a little bit anxious to get outside, the pecking order has changed, all these things, they're eating more hay versus grass. So I'd say if you can run a diffuser, 3 or 4 diffusers in your barn almost every day during those types of conditions, that would be really highly recommended, and I think would reduce levels of stress. Stress is going to cause fiber breaks too. So these animals, during the wintertime, you're getting ready in the spring, you're getting ready to shear your animals. If they're all stressed out during the winter, what kind of fiber are you going to have when you're ready to shear? You're going to see fiber breaks and other types of problems as well. So keeping these animals healthy during the winter is going to lead to healthier fiber in the spring when you get ready to shear, which is going to equate to more revenue for you when you start selling your fiber or creating fiber products. Another thing I thought about, another animal that's at high risk during the winter is your geriatric camlid. Many of these animals, they decline pretty dramatically in health by the time they're 12 years old. They certainly would lose their standing in the herd because the other younger animals are vying for the alpha in the herd. So a lot of them are even pushed away from the feeding buckets, so they're not getting the nutrition that they did when they were younger and able to fight off some of these attacks from other animals. A lot of geriatric alpacas have dental problems. So are they really able to eat and chew and get the most out of their food because of the dental problems? And if as these conditions, as these things happen in the geriatric camlid, there's a marked decrease in absorption of nutrients in their GI tract. Okay, so they're really not getting the nutrients that they really should get or could have been getting when they were younger animals. So overall, their whole immune system declines whenever they get older. And, you know, it's like that with people too and other animals. But basically, if you have older animals over 12 years old, your animal's going to need a little more love and care and a little more attention during the winter. So what I would recommend again is our immune protocol. And again, for the geriatric alpacas, I would say instead of twice a week, I would go to 3 or 4 times a week. And depending on your season, how cold it is, how miserable the weather is, how much these older alpacas are being pushed around by the younger ones, whether they're actually getting their grain and their hay or not. But 3 to 4 times a week would not be unreasonable for the geriatric camlid. Okay, next topic, mastitis. Mastitis, you're going to have, you know, during the fall, we have a lot of crias. So during the winter, this time of year and in the winter, you're going to have mothers that are lactating and nursing those crias. And mastitis is an inflammation or an infection of the mammary glands. And it's caused by entry of bacteria into the teat canal and goes into the tissues that are producing milk, the milk glands. So, you know, you're going to have a lot of crias. If you're breeding on your farm, you're going to be having crias that are nursing during the winter. And bacteria are ever present in the barn environment. Okay, so they're always there. They're waiting for suitable conditions to present themselves. So winter, when you got all this commingling of animals in the barn, it's a prime time, you know, for us to have some of these bacterial infections. And you think about it, your animals are probably urinating on their bedding. There might be some poop piles in the barn because they can't get out or they just don't want to go out. It's a prime time for increased risk for some of these infections. And for your nursing mothers, this could be critical and it could be extremely detrimental to the crias who are nursing at that time. So I think the treatment is we really need to send a strong signal to the immune system that to try to get the nursing mother to deal with this threat on her own. So increasing the frequency of that protocol, the immune system protocol again. And I would say, you know, all during lactation, but certainly maybe even before conception, if you got a pregnant mother, a pregnant female, that's why I wanted to do this in-service a little earlier this time because, you know, you might, probably most crias that people that are breeding for fall babies probably have had those babies already. But if you can start your immune protocol on some of these females that are delivering now or will be delivering in the next month and be lactating and nursing in the next 6 months, start as early as you can. Even if the baby is not born yet, start now with that immune system protocol. Because mastitis could be really, really detrimental, not only to the mother, but it could kill the baby. Okay, this is the next topic I have is I thought that was kind of interesting. It has nothing to do with oils, I don't think, but maybe it's just a tip for everybody. Your food, your procurement of your food and your storage of your food. If you're not sure where you have a reliable source for your hay, it's always a good idea to get that hay tested. Have an analysis of your hay to find out exactly, you know, what's in your hay and whether it has enough nutrition to support your animal over the winter. So, you know, a lot of people get their hay from the same provider every year. I know last year we had a really wet winter here in the Shenandoah Valley, or a wet summer, and it was hard to get hay. I had to go to people to get hay that I didn't even know. I'd never even met them before. And I was trying to get, and we ended up with some really bad hay. And fortunately, our alpacas won't even eat it, and we had to get some other hay. But so if you're not sure of your source, I would really get my hay checked, do an analysis on it. If you have bag supplements, I would really protect them from rodents. Put them in some kind of sealed container. You know, the rodents are coming in the barn, you know, this time of year, and they'll eat right through those bags, and they'll contaminate your bag supplements. And lastly, I think they should be secured from any possibility that there's an accidental ingestion by the animals. Because if the animals can, if you're leaving your supplements out, if your animals can get to them, they'll eat until they can't eat anymore, and then you're going to cause problems. Probably one of the biggest problems is a gastric acidosis, which could cause a lot of problems for your intestinal problems for your animals. So make sure they're secured and not left out so the animals can overeat. Okay, the next topic is nutritional needs. You need a higher intake level to support your growth and your late pregnancy and your lactation, some of the things we just talked about. So more digestible feeds are really important to animals. And over the winter, it's really a critical time, and whenever you have females that are pregnant and lactating and nursing. So how do we get more digestible feed to the animal? Well, your gut's a pivotal organ in doing all that. And your gut mediates the nutrient uptake and how it's used inside of the body. So essential oils, they beneficially affect the GI ecosystem by they do a couple of things. They control potential pathogens in the stomach. They alleviate some of the stress caused by oxidation just from eating and ingestion and digestion. And they stabilize the gut microbiota. It's a hard word to say for me, but they stabilize that. So essential oils are really, they improve intestinal health. And many studies that we've seen a lot of studies where these oils really have helped improve nutrients and the absorption of the nutrients. Mm-hmm. And again, this time of year, when they're eating hay and they're not getting green grass and they're competing in the barn, co-mingling, mm-hmm. anything you can do to be sure that they're getting more digestible feed and they're getting better absorption of the nutrients would be really critical to keep them healthy and produce that healthy fiber that we want to see in the springtime. Let's see, Liz. Some of the essential oils, we've talked about this, that assist with the gut performance and improve that food to nutrient ratios, things like cinnamon and oregano, clove, lemon, eucalyptus, peppermint, thyme, rosemary. And most of those are in our protocol. So people that are signed up with us and on our team, they know already about those protocols. But treatment I would recommend is, again, our immune system treatment that has most of those oils that I just mentioned are in our immune protocols. And another one I would use is peppermint. Peppermint's really not, put it in their water. I don't think we have peppermint in our protocol for the immune system, but it's a heavy hitter with when it comes to some of the gut converting helping the absorption of nutrients. Peppermint has been, I saw that in a number of studies. So putting peppermint in the water, I know we do that in the summertime for cooling our animals, but put in the wintertime to make sure that the absorption of these nutrients and the food to energy ratio is enhanced and improved, I think would be really important. So for the gut, the immune system protocol, and peppermint in the water. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's all I've got. So I hope that everybody has a healthy winter with their alpacas, and that leads to healthy spring breeding and babies, mm-hmm. and healthy fiber when we shear. And the oils are a key ingredient in doing all that. So look up your protocols in our booklet. Call us if you have questions. A lot of this is mostly common sense stuff, but I just wanted to highlight it. Things that you probably know or have known, but just don't think about it as much. Mm-hmm. But going into this time of year, I think a refresher course on stuff like this is always a good idea. So, okay, thank you for your attention, whoever, and call us if you have questions.